In this video, I will be attempting to survive 100 days in Australia in hardcore Minecraft. This means I'll have to watch out for the extreme heat and deadly animals, all while I explore the outback and see what landmarks Australia has to offer. Let's get into the video. I spawned in and took a look around me, and I soon saw quite a few mobs. Oh, that turned out to be emus. That's a fun run that you have there. It's real fun. That's a spider. Is that? Yeah, that? Oh, that's a couple of spiders. After my first outback encounters, I headed for this small forest. But after looking around for a bit, I saw that it didn't have any wood. The trees were just a bit thin. So I headed further into the outback. And after a bit of walking, I spotted another forest. This one actually had wood, which was great, as I collected some and made basic tools. I then decided to head further into the swampy area, and the environment around me seemed to change as I progressed. My temperature also seemed to change, as it looked like I was on the verge of overheating. So I headed into this nearby river to cool off. But as the sun started to set, I dug a hole in the ground and burrowed, since I didn't have any bed to sleep in. I did some mining and found coal, which I used to craft torches. But then, I ended up finding the most amount of iron I've ever found in my first night. A total of 16 pieces, which I quickly started smelting. As the sun rose the next morning, I crafted some shears and some iron tools, before taking a peek outside to confirm that it was, in fact, daytime. Upon resurfacing, I spotted this spider and quickly killed it. And it dropped 2 string, which isn't bad. But now it was time for me to craft some leaf armor, as it would protect me from overheating. So I collected some leaves and crafted it, before also crafting a boat. I then got in the river and started rowing. Only I was unknowingly rowing into one of Australia's most dangerous locations. Now before we continue, you know what time it is. I'm here to talk to you about Name Hero. If you want a Minecraft server host that isn't laggy or complicated like a lot of server hosts are, then Name Hero is really the best option for you. And look, yeah, they're sponsoring me, so I have every single reason to talk positively about them, so instead, let's take a look at some of the reviews. With over 2,000 reviews, Trustpilot alone gives Name Hero 5 stars, but so do these other 2 sites. And that's just because Name Hero is both affordable and easy to use. Their panel is so easy to use that even Tino here could use it. You wanna say hi? Yeah, I don't know if he could actually use it for legal reasons that has not been tested. Anyways, at any time you can send them a message if you need help, and they'll easily help out. But here's the important part. If you want to use Name Hero, be sure to use the link in the description or in the pinned comment. That way, Name Hero can know that you came from my videos specifically. But with all that being said, big thanks to Name Hero. And now, let's pick up where I left off, in one of Australia's most dangerous places. Kangaroo National Park is one of Australia's largest national parks, being made up of many rivers and wetlands. But where the danger lies is within the murky waters, as Kangaroo is home to around 10,000 crocodiles, many of which are the infamous saltwater crocodile. But despite the dangers, Kangaroo hosts some really stunning scenery and Aboriginal rock art that dates back to around 20,000 years ago, securing Kangaroo's place as a World Heritage Site. But as I rode deeper into the wetlands, I started to realize just where I was. It's too swampy. Yeah, this is the place. This is the... okay. Unfortunately for me, the sun soon began to set, and I was left to row in the darkness. Yeah, this was more than unsettling, but it soon got worse, as while I didn't spot any crocodiles, I soon spotted fins. See, I had reached the ocean, So, since I was unhappy with this sudden revelation, I rowed alongside the shore. Only I realized that a shark was tailing me. I had no choice but to jump out of my boat and run. I don't even know what to do. I don't even know what to do. I just don't know what to do. I eventually distanced myself from the shark and the mobs, before quickly blocking myself in and just waiting for morning, which came soon enough. I hopped out of my enclosure before getting some wood and crafting a boat. After a bit of rowing, I headed inland to craft a shield, and then find some food. But I didn't see any mobs, so I just cooked some lobsters instead. My new goal was to craft a bed, and also find a suitable spot for my base. Only after rowing for a little while longer, it was a structure that I found instead. I climbed up this watchtower and was very happy to see a bed at the top. I also collected this strange loot, before collecting this lantern, furnace, and then chest. Oh, and I saw a really nice sunset. Next morning, I had left the watchtower and continued rowing along the shore. I was still rowing along the dense forestry, so I just kept going, hoping to find a clearing soon. Oh, and naturally, I spotted many more sharks, and was also hit by pufferfish. Yeah, nature. That afternoon, I found this little beachy outlet and started cooking some glass for my bottles. On the morning of day 5, I crafted the bottles and healed up. I then set off, and quickly got hit by yet another pufferfish. A little while later, I ended up rowing over this swarm of sharks, and once again, I had one tailing me. But soon enough, that didn't matter, as I rowed into a new area. This was a much more open spot with more rocks and shrubs rather than trees. So I decided that this would be the perfect spot for my base. I got to work on clearing a spot for it. And, as I do that, let me tell you exactly what I'm doing this time around. See, Australia is full of some really incredible wildlife. So, for this video, my base is going to be a zoo. And I will be finding each animal for the zoo at a corresponding landmark of Australia. But with that being said, I cleared this entire beachfront, which took just about all day. And as the sun set that evening, I confirmed that this was the spot that I wanted. Next morning, I started on the enclosure of my first animal on the list, the emu, which I would find at Kings Canyon. So my goal now was to finish an enclosure for the emu before heading to the canyon and bringing the emu home. I ended up having to head back to the wetlands for wood, but by that evening, I had finished the first glass layer of the enclosure. On day 7, I continued building the emu enclosure. Only I was soon interrupted by a group of pillagers. I took care of the axemen, and then the crossbow guy, and then just continued building, only now with a fun little status effect. After finishing the second layer of glass, I then made a mine. And as I did so, I figured that I would only need one more day to finish this enclosure before I head out. And so, on day 8, I finished the layer of glass and made the roof, before making this stony pathway outside. Soon enough, I worked on the interior of the enclosure, and after all that work, the enclosure was ready for an emu. Next morning, I headed southwest, as I knew that Kings Canyon was towards the middle of Australia, which makes it more or less south from Kangaroo. So I continued in that direction, while on the lookout for spiders or slimes, as I still needed a lead. As I headed into this forested bit, I did some treetop jumping, and just like always, I fell and lost a lot of health. Only I hadn't realized that I was out of water until this very moment. Yeah, not a great situation, especially as I reached the outback that evening. This was bad. I had lost the ability to sprint, thanks to my lack of water, and I was heading further into the outback. where there very well might be dangerous wildlife for me to run into. I could only hope that I was somewhat near the canyon. And after a bit of walking, I actually spotted a hill. But as I approached it, I saw that it was not a canyon. So further south I went. But on day 11, I saw something promising as trees came into view. And behind these trees was something massive. See, one of my problems had just been solved, as I had just found King's Canyon. King's Canyon is a sandstone canyon in central Australia that has walls reaching up to almost 500 feet, or 150 meters. This canyon is housed within the Wadarka National Park, and boasts grand rocky scenery that contrasts with the almost oasis-like creek and forestry within. Alongside the scenery, you can find animals like dingoes, different types of lizards, and of course, emus. I walked along the outside wall of the canyon as I began to look for an opening. Soon enough, I not only found an opening, but also the very animal that I was looking for. And a few more. Oh, and water, which would definitely be helpful right about now. So I healed up, and shortly after spotted some pillagers, which I just decided to ignore. I then figured that I should explore the canyon a little before bringing the emu back. So I started down this creek, and quickly saw some snakes. I soon found myself among some really incredible scenery, before eventually turning around to head back towards the emus. Next morning I stayed along the creek, and remembered that I still didn't have a lead, so I would have to improvise. I got it into my boat, and figured that I should try to row it as far as I can. I found this river path that did actually head north, so I took it, until it reached a watery salt flat. So yeah, I knew that I would have to change my strategy here, and the only idea I had in mind was a rather bold one. Come on. Ooh, okay. Yeah, it didn't exactly work as planned, but eventually I did get it to chase me. And it hurt. Ah, that's damage. That is damage. Oh, duh. We made it decently far with this strategy, until it backtracked a ridiculous amount. Yeah, this was not going to work. So next morning I looked at the crafting recipe for a lead again, and this time I saw that I could actually craft it with straw. So I can make a lead with straw, and I can get straw by cutting grassy crops and plants with a knife. So yeah, I just needed a knife, which required one piece of iron, so I got to mining. And a little while after finding coal, I found some iron, so I smelted it and crafted the knife, which I then used to cut this grass and get straw. Finally, I crafted my lead, and my travels were made much easier, although the lead still disconnected every now and again. On day 15, Craig and I made it to the forest, and yes, that is his name. The forest was a lot more difficult to traverse with him though, so I aimed for the parts with the least amount of trees. After a long and frustrating amount of weaving through the brush, Craig and I reached the coast, just as the afternoon set in. But as we boated back towards the base, a thunderstorm began and I just went to sleep. Next morning it was time to put Craig in his enclosure, so I did just that. And now that he's in, let's talk about Australia's flightless bird. Emus are exclusive to Australia, and are the second largest bird in the world, coming in right behind the ostrich. Now these guys are actually athletic stars, as they can run up to 31 miles an hour, or 50 kilometers an hour. This came in handy during the Great Emu War of 1932, where Australians attempted to lessen the emu population that was destroying their crops, and they rather famously lost to the birds, as they were just too fast and too tough for their trucks and guns to be effective. Yeah, that's such a fun piece of history. Anyways, with the emu secure, let's move on to our next enclosure, which is for the giant clam. And I will find that at the Great Barrier Reef. So I got to work on mining for this enclosure, as I wanted to be in a big walk-through cave. I collected some diorite for the floor and began placing it, before continuing my building efforts the next day. I ended up finishing about 2/3 of the structure, and mixed in some normal stone for the texturing. This would likely take another 2 or 3 days, as I had yet to even make the tank. Next day I did some more flooring and roofing, before finally doing the tank itself. And then I crafted a bucket that evening. On day 19 I finished the cave roof, and noticed that there were now lobsters in the clam enclosure. Yeah, I guess it can be a multi-animal enclosure. Anyways, after walking through the cave that evening, I decided that I really liked it. I was very much ready to set off for the Great Barrier Reef. So, next morning, that's just what I did. Although I did have to stop at the wetlands again to get some wood. But I started rowing in the direction of the reef, which would take a bit, as the reef was on the east coast of Australia, and my base was more or less top-middle, judging by how close I was to Kakadu. As I continued rowing, I eventually decided to cut across some land in order to keep east. Only that's when I found myself among some really amazing scenery. See, I was on the northern edge of the Great Dividing Range, a series of mountain ranges and hills that make a geographical barrier on Australia's east coast. And these mountains are really something else. As I walked along the land, I collected some white concrete powder for my base, before making it back to the ocean. The next morning, I rowed out into the water to see if I could find the reef, as I could only assume that I was on the eastern coast now. And as I spotted some fins, the shore disappeared from view. And yeah, I was not really enjoying this, especially as I spotted a shark right below me. But as I kept rowing out into the water, the ocean floor below me became dotted with coral, until eventually there was no doubt in my mind that I had reached the reef. The Great Barrier Reef, a true wonder of the blue world. This is the largest collection of coral reefs in the entire world, and it is home to thousands of different maritime species, like the humpback whale, the tiger shark, and the giant clam. As you probably know, this reef is one of Australia's most famous locations, and it's not hard to see why. However, as I kept rowing above the reef, I ended up spotting a boat nearby. After hopping onto it, I was able to get a look at some of the reef's wildlife through this glass, before looking through the boat's loot. In this chest, I found a fish bomb, whatever that is, some slippers that keep creepers away, and some scuba gear. Last two things being especially helpful, and yes, the cat slippers looked very stylish. Next morning, I decided that it was time to do some diving and find this giant clam. And while the reef is generally safe, I did want to keep an eye out for the tiger sharks, one of which I soon spotted. But luckily for me, I also spotted a clam shortly after. So I got my lead out, only to find that I couldn't lead it. I figured that it might have to be out of water in order for me to lead it. I started construction on a little box, but still found that this didn't work either. After having done some research, I dove down the next morning, as I'd figured out how to properly transport them. Yeah, literally as easy as that. Since I still had a bucket available, I decided to get some fish for the enclosure too. Only I got a little bit too close to the shark, so yeah, I opted to get more clams instead. From here it was time for me to head home, and I much preferred this way of transporting wildlife. But I had no time to appreciate it, as a hammerhead shark soon began to chase me all the way to shore. Regardless, I decided to cut back across the land, and this continued through day 25, where I lost a lot of hunger and eventually had to kill some lobsters. However, after cooking and eating them, I continued in the direction of my base, and made it back right at sunset. The next morning, I got the clams and placed them in the enclosure, as well as some sea pickles. Now with that done, let's talk about these fascinating creatures. See, giant clams are mollusks that live on various reefs across the Indian Ocean and the South Pacific. And while these guys eat tiny plankton, their weight averages around 200 kilograms, or almost 450 pounds. But remember, that's just their average. The heaviest giant clam recorded was 250 kilograms. Yeah, these guys are natural anomalies. Anyways, I now had the giant clams in their enclosure, which means it's time for the next animal, which will be the kangaroo, and I will find one at the Grampians National Park. With that being said, it's time to start on their enclosure, but I was soon interrupted by a certain trader. I ended up buying these flowers from him, and then he kindly offered his leads to me. I then got started on the kangaroo base. I wanted to match the style of this one with the emu enclosure. And speaking of which, I put water in that enclosure that evening. On day 27, I did some glass placing and cave floor texturing, and eventually mining. Yeah, just a lot of boring work. And the same can be said for the next day, where I just worked on the kangaroo some. Yeah, I'm sorry, I had to. Kangaroo, like, it's just too good. Anyways, I then did some path placing and finished the cave floor. But on day 29, I had finished the enclosure, which means that it's time for me to head out. Only this time, I'll be heading much further south, as the Grampians National Park is on the southeastern corner of Australia. So I set off down the coast and did a good bit of rowing, before crossing the same bit of land as before. However, the next morning, I woke to some string on the floor, and that's when I saw a display of multiple large spiders. Being the person I am, I snuck up behind one and got it in my bottle, before noticing that there were many more nearby. So yeah, I decided to leave. Eventually made it back to shore and just kept rowing. That is, until I spotted this river that headed south. And so, I kept rowing, but now in an entirely different area. Next morning, I awoke to some more fun creatures. Oh, look at that. Got some snakes. Oh no, don't do that. That's not where you want to be. I rode some more, but soon found myself at a dead end. So I just kept going deeper into this forest, making sure I was still heading south. I found another river the next day, which I promptly took, and then I did a lot more rowing. Well, that is, until I came into an interesting area. Yeah, there were very large fields around me, and it was pretty clear that I was in a farm area. And of course it has to be a farm of my least favorite thing in the entire game. I crossed the river and saw that there were even more fields on the other end. And this might be because agriculture is a really big deal to Australia and the overall functionality of the country. In the parts of the country that can sustain agriculture, you better bet that there are farms, and lots of them. According to farmers.org, the farms themselves produce about 93% of the total volume of food consumed in Australia. And yeah, that is quite significant. Next morning, I realized that I still should keep heading south, but I wanted to explore the farmlands a little, so I just headed south through the farmlands. And that's when I spotted a tractor and a farmhouse. So yeah, this was officially a good decision. I hopped in the tractor and proceeded to play Farming Simulator for a bit, before hopping in this smaller tractor. And yeah, this thing was fast. Anyways, it was time for me to explore the house now. So I entered the house and almost immediately had to craft new leaf armor, as I was suddenly overheating. So after doing that, I then took some kitchen decorations and some of the stuff inside this barrel. But when I looked upstairs, I found this table and these benches that would work perfectly in a little rest area in my zoo. So I took them as well, before also finding even more cool loot in this chest, including a backpack that I quickly equipped. I headed back outside and got in my new vehicle, which was slower than the one in the Himalayas, but I'm not even complaining. I navigated the fields, and after a bit of driving, I found the end of the fields. And that's when I realized that this tractor would literally only be good in the outback. Otherwise, there's just too much brush for it to go through. So I left it here and made a pillar marking its location, before just hopping back in my boat and rowing some more. It ended up being quite hilly around me, and I eventually reached another dead end, so it was walking time. However, I wouldn't need to be walking for long, as when this big mountain came into view, I recognized it immediately, as I was now in the Grampians. The Grampians National Park houses some incredible mountain ranges that overlook vast landscapes and rocky cliffs. The sandstone mountains within this park turn a deep pinkish color as the sun sets, making it a popular place to go hiking. And if you ever do go hiking here, you'll likely come across some emus, echidnas, and of course, kangaroos. And just like Kakadu, the Grampians host an array of Aboriginal cave paintings that contextualize this national park as one with a deep cultural history. On day 35, I made my way into the park as I searched for a kangaroo. And, well, it didn't take long. Only I decided not to go for this one, as it was on a hillside. So I instead went for this one over here, which had little surprise waiting for me. Yeah, this one was carrying a joey, which is the name for a baby kangaroo. And while the joey was cute, leading it and its mother through the forest was not. Yeah, this was torture, as it always is. I really hate leading mobs. We made it back to the riverbank the next morning, but I still wanted to go back and explore the Grampians a little. So I headed back through the forest and eventually hiked up to this cliff, where I saw one of the coolest sunsets yet. Yeah, Australia is pretty cool. On day 37, I made it back to the kangaroos and took them water skiing. No, literally, that's what they do as I lead them while I'm rowing. Anyways, I made my way back up north, hoping to reach the ocean again and continue from there. Only after a bit more travel, I realized something really unfortunate. Somewhere along the journey, the kangaroo had released the joey. I've done a lot of accidentally morally questionable things in these videos, but that just might be the worst. Yeah, that is a bit grim, but I guess that's just the nature of the game. Anyways, on that cheery note, bringing the kangaroo home took a couple of days, and at one point I even accidentally hit it, which is a terrible mistake to make. But luckily it wasn't hostile for too long. We then made it to the ocean and continued home, as I looked at my zoo list and saw that I still had 7 more animals to go, some of which are dangerous, one of which is deadly, so yeah, great. Regardless, on day 42 we finally reached the base again, and I got Rue in her enclosure, before heading to the wetlands to get some more wood. And while I do that, let's go ahead and talk about the world's most famous marsupial. Kangaroos are the icons of Australia, jumping around just about all of the world's red continent. Speaking of which, these guys can jump about 30 feet, or 9 meters in a single effort. As for their legendary status as Australia's most iconic animal, well, that comes with a reason, as kangaroos are so common in Australia that they almost outnumber the human population in Australia by 2 to 1. Yeah, there are over 42 million of these guys just jumping around down under. But with that being said, it's time to look at the next animal on my list, and this should be a relatively easy one, and that is the bearded dragon, which I'll be going to Uluru to find. And so, I got to work on making the bearded dragon enclosure, and while bearded dragons can be found across most of Australia, this just gives me an excuse to check out Uluru. But with that in mind, I finished the enclosure and added some touch-ups to the others. That brings me to my last day of base work for a bit, where I went to mine some stone and caught this creeper just staring at me. Yeah, that's a little bit eerie. But I then finished up some stone flooring and placed these benches, which looked absolutely perfect. Finally, on day 45, I began my trek into the outback. I ventured into the same forest as before, only this time I had let my guard down. I ran as soon as it bit me, but that didn't even matter, as I was quickly reduced to half a heart. I checked to see if it was chasing me, but eventually I just towered up and then healed up. Yeah, that was a very close call. And it just proves that I should not let my guard down in the outback. Soon enough, I was ready to keep going, and so I headed for Kings Canyon, as Uluru is just south of it. The next morning, I reached the canyon, and then kept south, through the endless expanse that is the outback. But my travels soon came to a stop, as on day 47, I spotted trees. And behind those trees, a massive rock. This is Uluru. Uluru is huge. It's a giant sandstone rock that sits in the middle of Australia's outback. And at 2,800 feet, or almost 900 meters, it is taller than the Eiffel Tower. But more than just its size, Uluru is sacred to the indigenous people of Australia, who also have another sacred site not far from here, and that is Karajuta, a collection of large rocks that are similar in color to Uluru. And again, their size is probably hard to comprehend. The tallest formation is as tall as the One World Trade Center in New York. I genuinely have no words for that, other than, well, you really need to see these for yourself, as do I. Anyways, as I approached Uluru, I was again just taken aback by the size, even in Minecraft. But I also had a search to do, and so I began my hunt for the bearded dragon. But by that evening, I had only found some emus. Next day, my luck changed. I started to lead this bearded dragon when I decided that I should also bring another emu, just so Craig can have a friend. Soon enough, I spotted water and we started to row up it. Only I brought the dragon into the boat with me, as I didn't want him to drown. Next day, we did a good bit of travel. I ended up taking the same river from earlier, and thus took the same path home. Only, the next morning, I realized that it was already day 50. I'd like to take this day to say thanks for watching this far into the video. And the comment who guessed the location first was Elijah Smith 5593. This one was close, as you all guessed this one really quickly. And so yeah, Elijah, you win a kangaroo. Yeah, I'm sending you a kangaroo, so just be expecting that. Anyways, I also want to give one more thanks to Name Hero, as they have been a terrific sponsor, and they are a brand that I genuinely do believe in. But with that being said, as I traversed the forest, I watched for snakes. And that evening, I made it home. On day 51, I put the bearded dragon in its enclosure. And while I put the emu in the other enclosure, let's talk about Australia's scaly friend. See, bearded dragon sounds like a scary name, but they are friendly with people as well. And perhaps that's why they're such a common pet to have. But outside of their social nature, bearded dragons have unique abilities like puffing up their chin when threatened, or even changing colors based on their temperature or emotion. Now, with yet another animal in my zoo, I think it's time to double up for this next adventure. So, next I will be heading to find a carpet python at the Pinnacles, and a Titan triggerfish at Ningaloo Reef. So with that being said, I got to building. Only I wanted to build the rest spot first. So the next morning I started on my cave top retreat area. I also decided that the triggerfish would fit right in with the clams, but the snake would probably have to go around the back of the cave. On day 53, I finished the rest spot, and then started on the snake enclosure, before finishing around 2/3 of it and collecting a lot of stone. But finally on day 54, I finished the enclosure. That means it's time to head west, because both Ningaloo and the Pinnacles are right here on the west coast. And so I went to get in my boat, only it seemed as though it was already occupied. I ended up cutting through Kakadu, which was a choice, but luckily enough I didn't have a hard time finding this river, Only this time, I also didn't have a hard time finding crocodiles. After thinking for a second, I eventually decided to just go for it. Next morning, I woke to this snake nearby, and even more crocodiles. Yeah, this was starting to get concerning, especially as the rain began. This made it harder for me to see underwater, but perhaps that was for the better. Shortly after I came to a dead end, but I wasn't alone. So I went into the trees and just kept trekking through the rain. But I knew that my time in Kangaroo was far from over, as the saltwater crocodile was on my zoo list as well. On day 56, not only had the rain stopped, but I had found my way to the ocean. And while I wasn't quite on the west coast yet, I could at least hope that I was getting close. But yeah, day 56 involved a lot of rowing. But as I eventually descended the west coast the next day, I kept rowing over the vibrant blue waters, only to notice some coral forming below me. And sure enough, I found myself above the Kangaroo Reef. See, Kangaroo comes from the Aboriginal language Wajari, and it roughly means deep water. And within these deep waters is a whole nother world of sea life. Most prominently, the whale shark, as Kangaroo Reef is one of the best places in the world to see these gentle giants. And you can even swim with them here. If you don't end up exploring the Great Barrier Reef, then Kangaroo is a stunning alternative. But remember that the coral reefs are fragile, and so is the life within them. So regardless of where you end up, always be respectful, as this is a world that has existed long before our own. I found myself swimming with the whale sharks before watching this strange mantis creature attack this octopus. Yet still no triggerfish. But it didn't really help that I wasn't sure what they looked like. Soon enough though, I ended up finding one on the very edge of the reef. I also crafted another bucket and set off to find a female triggerfish to pair with the male, for science reasons. But the next morning, having found my fish, I set off down the coast, now with a mission to get to the pinnacles. Yet as I walked along the shore, I spotted some more spiders, and I once again decided to collect one. Eventually, I got back in the water and just kept rowing south. I also decided that I would be making an additional spider habitat. On day 59, I saw some trees as I made my way south, but I decided to collect these azaleas before exploring any further. Only that led me to seeing this lighthouse in the distance, and I knew from experience that this was a pillager lighthouse. So I approached it carefully, before rushing in and destroying the spawner. One managed to spawn, but I took care of him quickly. The loot wasn't terrible, as it was mostly just string and onions, which I guess is fine. But I was more interested in collecting this wood for my zoo. Anyways, I started to head inland, past the isolated patch of trees, but still no pinnacles to be found. Next morning, I was on the verge of heading back to the ocean, but I ended up spotting some sand. And upon closer inspection, I'm very glad that I didn't leave, as the pinnacles were right in front of me. The pinnacles are stacks of limestone found in Western Australia near the coast. These strange structures were formed anywhere from 20 to 30,000 years ago, when the sea level fell and the shelly sands were broken down. And this is what's left of those shelly sands, shaped by the torrent of time. As I made my way into the park, I almost ended up stepping on something not so friendly. I picked up this shedded skin, before then picking up the snake to see if it was the carpet python. Only it wasn't. It was a ball python, which aren't even found in Australia. So I was a little bit confused, but I just continued further into the park. I walked among the limestone stacks, feeling as though I was in some kind of experimental maze, but soon enough I found another snake. And sure enough, this was the carpet python. They were a lot easier to collect than I thought they would be, so I just picked up another. And no, carpet pythons are not stackable. Anyways, given the brevity of this trip, I decided that I was going to go ahead and collect the next animal for my zoo, and I might as well, given that it was south of here. So with that being said, next up is the little penguin, which I will find at Lake Hillier. I began heading south into these open fields when I spotted the same snake that had bit me earlier, so I cautiously figured that sea travel might be safer, and honestly faster. I reached the shore the next day and got some lobsters before heading south. Only after a bit more rowing, I spotted a boat, and as I approached it, a swarm of fins appeared around it. Yeah, I'm gonna play it safe, but I will definitely be exploring that boat, only on my own terms. The entirety of day 62 was used by me gathering dirt and bridging out over the water. Yeah, I severely underestimated the distance that the boat was from the shore, but I kept going. And on day 63, I discovered that my bridging very well had saved my life, as I was bridging over sharks, and these were not tiger sharks. Oh, okay. But when I finally reached the boat, my heart sank, as I found no loot aboard. Instead, there was a cage attached to the boat, and I knew what that meant. I peeked over the edge of the boat and couldn't even get to the cage, so I waited for this shark to leave, and eventually, I went for it. There was a bubble of air at the top of the cage, but as I submerged myself in the water, it was pretty clear that I was cage diving with great whites. There was also a chest at the bottom, and upon opening it, I found some dried wheat, some iron, and lots of swim gear that would increase my speed in the water. So that's great, I had the loot, but I still couldn't leave until the coast was entirely clear. I was not going to take any risks here, as I've come across great whites in this series before, and unlike most hammerheads or reef sharks, these guys can be extremely dangerous. But after a bit of waiting, I decided to just go for it. I made it right back onto the boat and then immediately back onto the bridge. Yeah, at least that whole thing did not go poorly. I equipped my new swim gear the next morning and tested it out. And sure enough, I was now really fast in the water. This reminded me a lot of Madagascar as I zoomed through the shallows. And soon enough, I had made it to Australia's southern tip. That afternoon, I headed out into the water in search of Lake Hillier, as Lake Hillier is on its very own island. And as the evening set in, I found an island, but I wasn't entirely sure that it was the island. But the next morning, as I walked around the island some more, I no longer had any doubts in my mind, as I spotted a little penguin. Yes. And sure enough, the famous pink lake wasn't far behind it. Lake Hillier is an often overlooked landmark of Australia, as it sits on its own island and can be hard to see, as the island itself is a nature reserve. As for the lake, well, it's a saline lake, with salt levels that are close to those of the Dead Sea. But of course, it's pink, and while the lake's hue was an enduring mystery for quite some time, it was recently found to be caused by a mix of bacteria and algae. But either way, this lake is just a really cool part of an already naturally stunning country. I walked around the lake and ended up attaching 2 more penguins to my lead. Look, single file, that's really good. Single file, that's good. Yeah, I was having fun. And soon enough, I got in my boat, and they all followed. Yeah, look at, there we go. Yeah, look at that. Now, just like with the kangaroo, this new horde of zoo animals took quite some time to get home, as I ended up rowing back and not swimming, due to my fears that they would drown. But as we make our venture home, I want to take a moment to thank the incredible mob developers behind these penguins. Marvinek and Poltergeist are the talented devs who made this mob as well as the Echidna. And, as always, the mobs are available for free through a link in the description. With that being said, I made it home on the evening of day 72. Okay, you guys chill there. Okay. Don't go anywhere now. Next morning, I knew that I had a lot of zoo work to do, so I got to it, keeping in mind that my base review will be on day 99. Oh, and fair warning, I have a couple of back-to-back animal segments here. So let's get right into it with the triggerfish. The Titan triggerfish is the largest type of triggerfish, and it's found in the Indian and Pacific Oceans, alongside coral reefs. And while these guys may just look like fish to you, don't make the mistake of getting near their nests, as they can actually be quite aggressive, but overall harmless. As for the carpet python, these snakes are found in both Australia and New Guinea, and they're actually one of the less dangerous snakes that you'll find in Australia, as they aren't even venomous. These guys are mostly nocturnal and can reach lengths of around 4 to 5 feet, or just over a meter. Yeah, in other words, they're pretty cute. As I placed the snakes in their enclosure, I also decided to put the ball python in there because why not? I really hope they don't, kill each other. I'm not a snake expert, so I don't know how that would go. Well, there's my answer. So, yep, good to know. That evening, I started on the stone paths around the area. And on day 74, I continued that quest. I ended up heading up to the wetlands again for wood, and then finished about half of the penguin enclosure. The next morning, I got some more stone for the paths, and had almost finished the enclosure when a thunderstorm started up. Things started spawning all around me, so I had to run through the zoo in order to get away from them. But after towering up, I was able to sleep. On day 76, I finally finished the little penguin enclosure. And so, let's finish this round of animals off with these tiny guys. Little penguins are found in New Zealand and southern Australia, where they stand out with their blue and white feathers, something unique to little penguins when compared to other penguins. Oh, and these guys are also the smallest penguins found in the world, as you can probably tell. They only end up getting to about 40 centimeters tall, or just over a foot. Yeah, they are my favorites. But now it's time for a very different animal, because next up is the saltwater crocodile in Kakadu. I've been dreading this one, and I decided that I'm going to go and collect it before making its enclosure. So as day 77 rolled around, I got everything I would need, and then headed for Kakadu. After leaving the ocean, I wandered into the dense forestry, and eventually climbed this clay mountain. Yeah, no crocs yet, but I knew it wouldn't be long until I did find one. The next morning, I rode my way up the river, and it was hard to see through the water, but I knew it wouldn't matter if a croc was near me. And around midday, I found them. As one started to approach me, I quickly checked behind me to see if there was one sneaking up. But since there wasn't, I decided to go ahead and try for this one. I went back and forth with it, until this happened. I immediately got away, completely unsure of how I survived that. I was able to heal up, but as I made another attempt, the sun began to set, and I just couldn't get myself close enough to the croc. So the next morning, I had to be reasonable. I decided that if I couldn't get the croc today, I wouldn't be getting one at all. And that brings me to my platform plan. Thanks to my abundance of dirt, I was able to make a platform above the croc. But after waiting for quite some time, I knew that this wasn't likely to work. So in one final effort, I got back in my boat. And I just went for one. I cannot believe that I actually had caught one. But I had no time to enjoy my win, as transporting it was genuinely terrifying. It was on my tail. So I led it through the rest of the crocodile-infested waters, and eventually into the ocean. needless to say, I will be omitting the saltwater crocodile from my zoo list. Next morning, I returned home, now a changed man. But every day is zoo day, and that means that I have to move on to my final 2 animals. First up is the Echidna, which I'll find at the 12 Apostles, and then the Tasmanian Devil, which I'll find in Tasmania. And so I started on the Tasmanian Devil enclosure, and then worked on posting signs around the zoo the next day. These signs were just here to properly establish the name of each animal. I also worked on the Echidna enclosure some, and then finished it the next day, where I also spotted some pillagers, only this time they actually got me quite low. But I killed them anyways, and I had some fun testing out this throwing axe. On day 83, I started my southern expedition, as both the Apostles and Tasmania are in the very south of Australia. But this time I would be using my speedy swim gear. And so I made it a pretty decent way down the eastern coast that night. The next morning, I cooked some lobsters and then headed back out into the water. And today, I actually reached the south coast. Yeah, never underestimate how much speed a swim floaty can give you. But south coast aside, I was also seeing lots of mountains form, as I was right at the bottom of the Great Dividing Range, the same collection of mountain ranges I mentioned earlier. And yeah, I saw one of my favorite sunsets that night. Next morning, I headed along the southern coast, occasionally stopping to fish and cook. But I kept swimming, and that swimming soon paid off, as I noticed some spires sticking out of the water ahead of me, and sure enough, I had reached the Apostles. The 12 Apostles are a group of 8 eroded rock stacks that line the coast of Victoria. And yes, that's right, the 12 Apostles only have 8 remaining, but there were only ever 9 to begin with. Now apparently the Apostles were named this way in order to attract more tourism. But if you ask me, the 8 of them are more than worth the trip, especially since you can take the Great Ocean Road to see them, which is supposedly one of the most incredible drives out there. I took a look along the beach for some echidnas, but found no mobs at all. It wasn't until I climbed the nearby cliff that I actually found some wildlife. And yes, among the wildlife was an echidna. I attached it to my lead before seeing an amazing view of the rocks. And then I led him down the cliffside. The next day, I kept the echidna here and cooked some lobster. And then I knew that it was time for me to head south. And so I got ready to swim at a speed that would make Michael Phelps cry. And south I went. Well, more southeastish, as this is the diagonal that I have to take. But after quite a while of swimming, I found an island. And no, it was not Tasmania. It was a tiny island. Right back in the water I went as I continued my path, and came to terms with just how deep the water had gotten. But after a bit more swimming, I was relieved to see the ocean floor rising again. And yeah, I was really hoping that this was Tasmania. I walked along the shore for a bit and still wasn't positive. In fact, I wouldn't be positive until the next morning, when I saw some of the most incredible scenery yet. Tasmania is unreal. With 18 different national parks, this island has everything. Scenic coastlines, grand mountains, misty lakes, it just doesn't stop. And this was another location where the Aboriginal people lived. And just like in mainland Australia, you'll find few places that hadn't once been home to them. As I walked through the forestry of Australia's island state, I found myself staring at a cabin in the distance. So naturally I swam across the lake to get to it. And upon doing so, I found some odd loot, like these statues and this kangaroo burger. I then walked around the cabin and almost immediately found the animal that I was looking for. And so, although my time in Tasmania was brief, I had to get this guy back to the echidna and then get both of them back home. As to be honest, I was getting a little bit worried about time here. After all, I still have base review on day 99, So we headed back towards the shore, and we ended up reaching some kind of land that evening. The next few days were all used by fun, exhilarating mob travel. Yeah, I was right to leave Tasmania when I did, because I did not expect it to take this long. And so, you all have a promise that I will cover Tasmania independently someday. But with that being said, as I brought my 2 final mobs home, I was ready to rate Australia's difficulty. Australia was a place that I was very cautious going into, as it's known for its dangers, and while I played it safe here, I did have my fair share of encounters that almost killed me. The crocodiles alone gave me some of the closest encounters I've had in this series, and so, I give Australia a total difficulty rating of 8.5 out of 10. I made it home on day 94, and knew that I had some work to do. But first, let's get these guys in their enclosures. And let's do a double feature. Echidnas live in Australia and New Guinea, and they are a very rare exception of mammals that have the ability to lay eggs. And while they might look like porcupines to non-Aussie viewers, echidnas aren't actually rodents, but rather monotremes, which is the label for egg-laying mammals. The Tasmanian devil, on the other hand, is a marsupial, and they are the largest carnivorous marsupials at that. These guys also used to exist in mainland Australia, but were unfortunately hunted to extinction by the dingo, which actually occurred well before the Europeans arrived. But fittingly enough for the name, the Tasmanian devil has the strongest bite-to-size ratio of all mammals, as they can even chew through metal. Yeah, I kinda want to meet one of these guys. Anyways, I headed over to Kangaroo to get wood, and now with the last of the animal segments done, it was time to polish this zoo. On day 95, I started on this birch hedge that I wanted to surround the zoo with. I also dug out some path areas and did lots of mining. The next day, I placed a lot of paths, and remembered that I still had my spiders, so I started on a tiny enclosure, and finished it on day 97. From there, I once and for all finally finished my stone flooring, before adding some features to the enclosures. Oh, and Huey, Dewey, and Louie, the penguins, had somehow adopted a half-red, half-blue lobster. And these spiders were doing something weird. Yeah, just a normal day in the zoo, I guess. But with that being said, it was now the last day of base work before base review. I added my finishing touches, like the exterior slab lining, before redoing the Tasmanian devil roof. Yeah, I really like my zoo. It was base review time. I looked through each part of my base one last time before making a final judgment. Let's start with the enclosures, most of which I really like. Yeah, overall these enclosures fit the zoo theming really well. Now on to the layout, which I genuinely love. I worked hard to ensure that there were enough paths everywhere, and that cave. I really like the cave, alright? Finally, the details. The lanterns were good, but I do wish I could have done more with them. The benches, though, are perfect. And my cave top rest spot is more than perfect, if that's even a thing. Look, needless to say, this is my best base yet, because I am giving this a new record score of 9 out of 10. I genuinely had so much fun making this zoo, and with that being said, there is still one more day left. I woke on day 100 and walked around my zoo. I took a look at each enclosure, while I thought about just how unique Australia had been. See, Australia is unlike anywhere I've covered, whether it be through social media, or through the Irwin family.
Conservation is my job, my life, my whole persona.
You know Australian wildlife, but locals exempt, you probably didn't know a good number of the landmarks I visited. This is one of the few places in the world where you immediately think of the animals before the wonders. And perhaps that's because they thrive here. In a country the size of continental USA, but with the population a third of the United Kingdom's, Australia really is like nowhere else, as the red continent is very much the wild continent. with that being said, it is about that time. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.